Hey everybody, it's Tom, and this week I thought I'd talk a bit about Thomas Merton, some essays of Thomas Merton, particularly some in this collection, Love and Living. Love and Living, I'll link that below. But before I get to that, I just want to sort of recap. Last week we discussed Gaston Bachelard and his fine little book, The Poetics of Space. And the main thesis, I feel, of the poetics of space, La Poétique de l'Espace, is that the encounter with the poetic image is fundamentally emancipatory. It draws us onto a space of freedom so that we are no longer bound or manacled by a preoccupation with the particulars of our personal or even general history. And on the conclusion of those reflections, I noted that to really enter upon a space of freedom is also to enter upon or into the sphere of love, which is that through which I will suggest freedom is most effectively expressed or realized. Love as a value, as an orientation, as a commitment. And it seemed that concluding remark demanded elaboration. And hence, back to Mr. Merton, Thomas Merton. And here's an individual that I would encourage you. Cars are going by. I would really encourage you to check him out. He's probably most famous for his autobiography, The Seven-Story Mountain. But he was quite prolific, and I've scarcely read much from him that isn't worthwhile. Probably my favorite collection of reflections is, I just love the title, is Confessions of a Guilty Bystander. I was like, oh, what a fantastic title. But we're drawing from this different collection today, Love and Living, which was put together posthumously by Naomi Burton Stone and brother Patrick Hart. And two essays in particular are the ones in there, and it came out in 1979. Merton lived from 1915 to 1968. Two essays in particular of moment for our purposes here were Love, is it a package or a message? And secondly, he had a reflection, The Climate of Mercy, which he dedicated to Albert Schweitzer. To begin with the first, he opens with a reflection upon how, in some ways, the expression to fall in love is kind of problematic in its implications. It sort of connotes that there's an ambiguity there, because there's the suggestion that there's something just sort of happenstantial about love, and potentially even unfortunate. Now, the positive side of the expression is that it shows us how love can have the aspect of power greater than ourselves. And in this regard, I think we're pretty much all on board. On the other hand, because of the implications of its sort of accidental quality, it can conduce to resonance with that kind of love, or that sense of love, which is preponderant in our own cultural ambience, our own cultural atmosphere. And that sense is love as a transaction, or as Merton puts it, love as a package. And to go ahead and turn to the essay itself, I thought it might simply be meet to read a passage of Merton's rather than simply go on my own. And to this point of a transactional conception of love, he says this, right? The idea of love is really a corollary of the thinking that holds our marketing society together. It is what one might call a package concept of love. Love is regarded as a deal, and this deal presupposes that we all have needs that have to be fulfilled by means of exchange. In order to make that deal, then he goes on, so you have to look certain ways and so forth, right? In doing this, to get back to the text, we come to consider ourselves and others not as persons, but as products, as goods, in other words, as packages. We praise one another commercially. We size each other up and make deals with a view to our own profit. We do not give ourselves in love, we make a deal that will enhance our own product, and therefore no deal is final. This concept of love, he goes on a few paragraphs, assumes the machinery of buying and selling of needs and fulfillment is what actually makes everything run. And this, in turn, is rooted on one level in the sense of society itself is a mercantile space, as an economy merely. On the other, it suggests that we are ultimately so many biological machines seeking fulfillment. But you see, that is the rub, and I'm jumping ahead to, another point in the text where he knows that the situation is this. We go into love with a sense of immense need and a naive demand for perfect fulfillment. This is the problem, though, because to consider love merely as a matter of need and fulfillment as something which works itself out in a cool deal is to miss the whole point of love and of life itself. Because the basic error is in fact to regard love merely as a need, an appetite, a craving, a hunger, which calls for satisfaction. This is a sort of privative or negative conception of love as a strategy to address an absence. And but you see, the bottom line is that then you're not really talking about love. Because if you're talking about love, then what you're talking about is something which no longer is seeking to fill a need, or which is addressing an imbalance in an equation. Love, by contrast, is a superabundance. A superabundance which recognizes what is in front of it. And even if what is in front of it is marred, if you will, by imperfection, by error, it nevertheless accepts it and affirms the beauty and the sublimity of that object. I shouldn't use the word object, because really we need to transpose to a mode of speaking which emphasizes the personality, the personhood of the lover, the loved, even, one might suggest, of the world itself. To be fixated, by contrast, on a need to justify, to evaluate, to assess, whether in a grossly commercial or subtler way, is to actually take yourself out of that space of possibility. It is also no longer to be living in a real freedom. Instead, you're living from a space of reaction, compulsion, constraint. Real freedom transcends those sorts of boundaries in a radical generosity. And as to that power, the other essay, which is of, I think, great avail, is the dedication he gave to Albert Schweitzer, The Climate of Mercy. And now, a caveat, all right, he is a monastic, he's a Trappist monk, and though not your ordinary monk, as if there is such a thing as an ordinary monk anyway, but his vocabulary throughout these essays, and probably in the Schweitzer essay in particular, is a thoroughly Christian vocabulary. However, the principles to which he is giving articulation are not merely Christian principles. And so I think it's important to extricate those two dimensions of his thought so that we are not bound by the accident of a given tradition, the Christian tradition, which opens up a whole other question. All right, well, what is the Christian tradition? Now, Merton himself was a committed Christian, so I wanted to be certain to acknowledge he would probably be less uncomfortable with the move that I just suggested. Okay, but I don't think that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think we should listen to what he has to say, regardless of our own positions vis-a-vis Christianity, at least in this connection. Now, having said that caveat, I want to go back to the Climate of Mercy and grab a passage out of there. And we're already coming up on almost like 15 minutes, so I got to wrap it up in a second. But and I can do that pretty quickly. Really, in the first paragraph, he says, and this sort of adeptly sums what I was driving in my sort of skimming of the question posed in the first essay, is love a package or a message? He says, if we love others only insofar as they love us, we are confined within an iron law of selfhood that seeks to assert our own existence and defend it, however hopelessly, against extinction. The love we thus give to others is the reward we offer them, the payment with which we buy their recognition of our own existence. With such love, we only bribe them to help us persist in an illusion of a deathless and complete autonomy, and we bribe them by helping them defend the same illusion in themselves. By contrast, and well, this isn't love, right? Because it's merciless. It's merciless because it demands a kind of reciprocity. The movement beyond that demand is the expression of mercy. Mercy, by contrast, is at work in the freedom, he says, in the freedom of the sons of God, and is the full expression of that freedom, its character, its proper name, the reflection of the truth that makes us free to receive mercy, and to give it is to participate as Son of the Father in the work of the new creation and of redemption in it. And there, of course, the caveat a few moments ago. You're looking at a very Christian vocabulary, but I don't want to be confined, and I don't think we should be confined by that vocabulary. The more fundamental point he is making with a phrase such as the sons of God is that our participation in our freedom is realized by the exhibition of mercy. Now, mercy really, it's in some ways it's the right word, but we have to be cautious because it can be freighted with some unfortunate connotations, right? And what it really consists is simply acceptance. And if we transpose this phrase "Son of God" out of a specifically Christian voice, what we're talking about is that as inheritors of being, as participants in the world, as existing, we have this capacity, we have this freedom. And our reconnection with that freedom can be kindled in various ways, in a preliminary sort of way, as we saw with Bachelard and in poetry. But more fundamentally, It is realized in relationship. It's not about getting what we want. It's about giving, affirming the other person, or the universe at large. By emptying ourselves of preoccupation with identity and demand, we can really enter into that giving. And that's really in what freedom consists. The import here is not merely personalistic. It's not something that we should keep fenced in within the province of our own life. It has dramatic political implications, especially in a world, and this is a concern that Merton raised, which at last is still with us, a world where you have tens of thousands of nuclear weapons. You have a world of sectarian division, nations, ethnicities, economies, etc. The list of potential sources of division is of a breadth I balk at even to consider. I mean, just this past week, we had this footage of these refugees fleeing Syria with, children, 3-year-old children, washing up on the shores of Turkey and elsewhere. It's just all that whole morass grows up out of the idolization of division. And the antidote to that idolization is precisely love. It's precisely a free acceptance of, really, especially those with whom we are uncomfortable. And the implications of that are a movement beyond a merely transactional economy, and a transactional relationship with nature, and a transactional relationship with each other. I'm going to close up with a passage from a third essay from this collection, and that is an essay which I didn't speak more about it today than I perhaps than beyond this passage, merely because I haven't really grasped it in its depth. And that was Love and Solitude, where he warns against, is that it? Oh, yes, it's Love and Solitude. There's another essay, Creative Silence. Got the two mixed up for a moment. But he warns against, this is another manner in which his transactional attitude manifests itself. He says, look, the ground of freedom, the ground of love, is actually a state of paradoxically unitary solitude, where we realize our personhood is connected with the personhood of the other. Ironically, there's some resonance with some of the remarks we got from Hart a few weeks ago. I say ironically because Hart's a committed atheist, Merton a committed Christian. In fact, he entitles himself a Christian existentialist. But that is neither here nor there, to get back on point. He says, if we don't appreciate this connection, we've lapsed into an emphasis upon the merely individual person, who is not a person, but a data point. And then, so we get, as a consequence, a mathematical quantitative concept of man. And to this point, he says, the price of a mathematical quantitative concept of man, for instance, in a positivistic and sociological approach, is that in reducing each individual to his own number, it reduces him to nothing. And in making the mass of men simply a total of individual units, it makes of it an enormous statistical void in which numbers simply proliferate without aim, without value, without meaning, without love. The peril of this massive numerical technical concept of man is then that it destroys love by substituting the individual for the person. And what is the person? Precisely, he is one in the unity which is love. He is undivided in himself because he is open to all. He is open to all because of one love that is the source of all, the form of all, and the end of all is one in him and in all. He is truly alone, who is wide open to heaven and earth and closed to no one. And there's an ambiguity in that passage. You could say he's talking about a singular, separate individual, whomever you may identify that individual to be. But in fact, he's talking about a potentiality, if not actuality, which inheres in all of us. Potentiality and actuality, even, of utter openness. It's a ground, right? And that's what we're talking about here. So, time to wrap it up. Past time to wrap it up. Thanks for listening. So these are to build again. Freedom and love are indissolubly connected. And when we approach issues of political and economic import, we need to ground our response to those issues in an appreciation of this fundament. In terms of texts upon which we might draw to enhance that awareness is the one that we've done today, Love and Living, a collection of essays by Thomas Merton, though there are innumerable others. Perhaps down the line, before too long, I'm going to maybe read something from Chogyam Trungpa, who is a noted Buddhist, whose conception of courage is this, that to be courageous is to be vulnerable, is to be open. But that's for another week. Later on this week, before we get to Mr. Trungpa, I'm going to do a little book on Gödel's Proof, entitled Gödel's Proof by Douglas. Well, anyway, we'll get to that. Anyway, I'll link to this stuff below. There's some thoughts for this week. I hope that they at least got a little bit of fire going in your head there. And please comment below. Please subscribe if you found it worthwhile. And sorry I went a little long. I hope it wasn't too dreadful. And I'll catch you guys next week. Thanks. Bye.